So here I go with 4 sets of case studies. Um, First two are from New York City, NYC is New York City. There are two attempts at creating parks and open spaces in differing situations. Second set is from sacred parks from Perth in Australia, Western Australia. Perth is in the extreme end of western end of Australia. And there are two parks, sacred parks of the Aboriginals, which they have conserved. So I'll be covering briefly the two parks and how the intervention demonstrates the way they approach the park. In some cases, I disagree with some of the approaches, but however, they are examples of how intervention can be done using the kind of principles that we have outlined in the first one. And the last one is the Rajiv Gandhi Ninevakam, which Ninevakam literally means somewhere where his memory is enshrined. That's what we call memorial. Yeah? Ninevakam is the Tamil word. It implies the memorial. In Sri Perumbudur, Tamil Nadu, it was designed by me, and the landscape was done by Shahir and Prelin Singh. Prelin Singh began the work, but then finally Shahir ended up doing it. So these are the examples I'll give you as to how differently contexts are interpreted, how a certain view or a certain perception about people change the way we inform the form, and so on and so forth. So I'll first start with the High Line. Many of you may be familiar with the High Line. Are there people who are familiar with the High Line?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir, they are. They must be, I guess.
Because the High Line is an excellent example of how kind of, an industrial leftover from the industrial era can be converted into an urban facility as a park. So I'll very quickly go through it. The details about the High Line is here as to how it is. The plans are here. You can see their location. High Line is a linear space, which is actually a raised railway line, which instead of dismantling the railway line, which was built in the 30s, they decided to convert that into a park. That was a competition called for, and the landscape architect came up with this concept. So it's an example of how a historic relic can be repurposed for a new meaning in the urban fabric. And now it's one of the most visited locations in New York. Now, the High Line in the New York City Park built on the elevated this one in 1930s. It was actually the freight rail which serviced the meat industry. In this area was a large concentration of piggeries and butcheries and so on. So there was a major industry that grew over meat in America, and this was the line which was built specifically to service that use. So that use has slowly left Manhattan. Manhattan is now a much more upmarket place. And as a result, this railway line also has become redundant. And therefore, they redid the whole thing. And the location you can see is in the heart of New York. And on the right-hand corner, you can see in black color, the plan of the High Line, how it weaves across the fabric of the city. There are some photographs of High Line. Here you can see how the elevated line, here is the elevated line, that's the High Line, moving right across the city like that, creating a free space at the bottom. And turning that into a park was the exercise that was taken up. On the right side, you see the image of the High Line cheek by jowl with the tall buildings in New York. And it meanders through this maze of tall buildings, connecting at different locations, using different views and linkages, visual linkages and connections to enhance the experience of using the High Line. So, here's an image of the High Line, how the railway, you can see the leftover part of the railway tracks there, and how the whole thing has been turned into a garden. Is there anyone who has visited High Line? Who's been to the High Line here? No response. So I presume that these are my own images. I've been to this High Line many times. Because there was a time when I used to go to New York every 3 months. And almost every time that I visited New York, I would go walking on the High Line because it was such a pleasurable experience to be walking on it. And it's a free access facility where anyone can just walk through and from one part of the city to the other part. You can use it even as a thoroughfare. There are no restrictions on anything. And it's very sensitively designed. More images of it. It has multiple activities, boarded walks actually, rather than concreted walks. And you can see how lush gardens are developed in the heart of Manhattan where there's not much scope for even trees. The building that you find, the bluish colored glass building that you find is Frank Gehry's piece. So slowly after introduction of this High Line, the area has begun to add, it's value added the area, and the real estate around has begun to change. And there's a transformation in the whole old Piggery district where newer and newer types of uses are coming in. The space is quite interestingly designed with even little water flowing in one location on one edge. In some cases, you can see that number of benches have been designed where people come and relax. It's very actively used location. Here's more images of people relaxing on the High Line at a height in the midst of the city. And the steps that you see on the left side is actually where the High Line is intercepting the main road. And these steps are built coming down towards the main road, so that from these seats you can gaze at the road, entire road, which is of course lined on both sides with 50, 60-story buildings. And this is one way the connection between the city and the High Line has been established, not simply as a place of repose, but also a place from where you can come and stare at the city. In some cases, the High Line also moves through under buildings. It's punctured the buildings because the railway track used to puncture it, and the garden actually continues under the building and emerges on the other side. And you have, the regular urban furniture, quite interestingly designed urban furniture, which qualifies the space. Now, this is a very interesting example of how a specific situation inside the heart of the city is converted into a public asset. Of course, there are lots of criticisms about the manner in which it was done. It was originally to have been done through crowdfunding, but then it wasn't done that way. Finally, there were all sorts of investment interests and all came in, and there's lots of criticism about them. But however, the net result of it is that now they're relying on crowdfunding for its upkeep and maintenance. They're expecting people to donate money. When you go there, you can donate some money, and that is then used for maintaining the High Line. Now, this is on the right side, you have the image of the stairs that goes down to the road into the Piggery district. You go down the stairs and you reach the old district where they were the meat district of New York. Here you can see how an experiential event is created in the High Line. in certain locations, they have had flowing water, very shallow flowing water, where you can see children immediately take to the water and they interact with it and they play and splash in that water. And you can be sure that this is not just a visual thing, it's an experiential thing that they are going to carry with them as a memory. And on the other hand, you have the newer buildings which are spanning across, and how this whole linear movement is meandering through the fabric of the city. That's the last image on the High Line, where from those steps, as I said, you can sit there and look at the wide road, which actually is flowing. It's flowing traffic of New York at the bottom. And from there, you can relax on those steps and keep staring at the road. So this is one way they connect at this point, where the intersection happens between the main arterial road and the highway and the High Line. They create this space from where you can step down and pretty good proximity watch the street below. That's the last of the High Line. Next, I'll show you the Roosevelt Park. It's called the Roosevelt Park. It's also called the Four Freedoms Park in New York. Now, this park is just recently built, a few years ago, completed a few years ago. It's designed by Louis Kahn, as a memorial to Roosevelt. Roosevelt, as you know, was a very celebrated president of the United States, and this is named after him. And Louis Kahn designed this in 1973, back in 1973, where it lay unbuilt for all these years. And recently, somebody who had actually been to Pratt Institute, where he taught at that time, and he made a presentation of it there, he, in fact, took up the issue, and now it is a built park. That's where it is located, not far from the High Line, a little lower from the High Line. And what you see at the bottom, the long white thing, is the memorial, is the open space which Louis Kahn has designed. And here is a quote from him. It says, "I had this thought that a memorial should be a room and a garden. That's all I had. Why did I want a room and a garden? I just chose it to be the point of departure. That is, departure of ideas. Then the garden is somehow a personal nature, a personal kind of control of nature, a gathering of nature. And the room was the beginning of architecture. I had this sense, you see, and the room wasn't just architecture, but was an extension of the self." You can see that a lot of the sentiments that we had brought out in the first part of our presentation are actually embedded in this quote from Louis Kahn. And this was a lecture that he gave in the Pratt Institute in 1973, where he showed this whole project. And after that, it just went dead because he died subsequently. And it is said that when he died, he had this project in his briefcase with him. He was hoping to take it forward, but it never happened. But subsequently, it's been built. It's in the heart of Manhattan. It's a kind of a floating island, tip of an island it's called the Roosevelt. It used to be called the Roosevelt Island. And this is the Hudson River that flows across the New York City basic fabric. So this is an image taken from the top of the UN building. Here is an image of looking back at the island. You can see the island. Can you see my arrow? Yeah. This is the Freedom Park. What you see here is the Freedom Park, and as designed by Louis Kahn, but executed decades after his death. This image is taken from my hotel room, looking down back at the Freedom Park. What you see in the foreground, this is the famous assembly building designed by Oscar Niemeyer. This is the UN General Assembly building. And that is the fabric. This is actually my hotel, the wall of my hotel. from the 63rd floor. I looked down and took this picture. This white area is where, when the UN building was under renovation, Ban Ki-moon's offices were located in this temporary white structure that you see here. It's all made of steel and has been subsequently dismantled, opening up the park. So the Freedom Park is right here. The Roosevelt Garden is right here. And that tip is what he calls the room. This is a very good example of how sensitively he has designed the whole park to deal with the shape of that island. It's a long linear island with a sharp pointed edge, and he used that edge to create this Freedom Park. Here's another image of the same thing, where you can see the Freedom Park here. This is the Freedom Park. It's taken in October. That's why all these green is turned red. And that's a boat speeding by. You can see how completely in harmony with the movement of the boat this whole structure is. It does not try to assert itself in any form. It lies dormant within its own context, lies low, and is part of the open landscape and the flowing water that's around it. This is when it's a close-up of, this is the forecourt of the Freedom Park. What you see here, this is the forecourt. This is an old hospital. It was a smallpox hospital. This island was used for isolating patients who got this kind of contagious disease. And this would be ideal case for a pandemic hospital now. But this was, the decision is of the New York Monument Committee is to actually retain this as it is and just restore the structure and leave it roofless as it is. That's a decision of the committee. And this is the forecourt from where you enter the park. This is what you see here. This is the park. You enter from here into the park. As you enter, this is what faces you. You just turn around and this is what faces you. There's a whole set of steps which actually lead to an upper level, which then slopes down to the water level at the edge of it. You know? So, and this is the whole streetscape or stairscape that's designed by Louis Kahn, and it's a very clean, clear form. And this is the main park. This is the Freedom Park, and that's all the vegetation that you have on this. You know? And the background, what you see here, this is the UN building. It's right in the heart of Manhattan, as I showed you the relationship from that building. That image was taken from the 36th floor of that building, looking down the earlier images that you saw. And this is looking back at the building. You can see what a restrained approach he has had as he is in the middle of water. This is another image of the park itself, where you have a series of trees lined up, which takes your vision right through. It's a progressively narrowing tip that it has, and this is looking back in that same space. This, what you see here as the white wall, is the granite. It's all gray granite that has been used for the whole structure, and that is the landscape of Manhattan. So you can see the level of restraint that's been there in this structure, and how he has connected the whole thing to the water. Another view of the water, and they say that this is the only piece of real estate which has not been built upon in New York. This little island that you see here with the birds on it. So this thing connects very directly with all these experiences. This is a close-up of the pathway itself. Here you can see the pathway here. What you see here is the detail of this landscape here, the elements here. Basically, these are kind of small broken stones which are actually bound by a resin together. It's an ultraviolet proof resin, And so when you walk on it, it doesn't get disheveled and dislocated. And it's also anchored by this net-like formation that you see here. That also anchors the whole the landscape. So it's a very restrained, very clean, clear kind of landscape, and it linearly takes your eye to the tip. This is what he calls the outdoor room, you know, where you have a quote from Roosevelt here. This is the quotation from Roosevelt. This is another view of the same thing, looking actually back from here towards this side. This is the scale of the one. It's just like a floor high almost, not more than that. And it's just completely flat in its expression. And the whole thing is in white, whitish, gray, white granite. There's another photograph of the same thing, looking at the way from the tip of I'm standing inside the outdoor room and looking out at the progressively widening landscape, which are outlined by these long, long line of trees. There's nothing in the middle. It's all completely empty, like you saw in the first image. More images of the outdoor room, where just the wall and the floor actually defines the space. And there are some variations on the floor, which progressively takes you to the small height from where the whole thing peaks into that location. It's still only about a floor high or floor and a half high. And that compared to the 110, 112 stories of buildings that you have in New York, this you can say it is a very bad use of real estate, but this is not real estate. The meaning of this space is that it's called the Four Freedoms Park, and it represents American democracy in its essence. This is the bust of Roosevelt himself. This is the central piece. He died in 1945. In 1882, he was born. And this is actually qualifies that the open room. And you can see the water at the back and the New York skyline at the back of that. So this adds all the parapet there is as a division between these. It's completely merged with its landscape. So here is an example of how a sensitive physical intervention can completely define the context in such a way that it becomes totally subservient to its context and becomes one with the context. Now I'll move to the two secret parks in Perth. Australia, as you know, was home to many Aboriginals whose art actually resembles the Gond art in India very much. And it's even said that before the continental rift happened, the Australian landmass was part of the Indian landmass. And the people who inhabit these places, the Aboriginals of Australia and we in India, the Aboriginals of India, are actually linked people who've been closely linked. And their expression of art, their expression of religion, their nature worship, they worship the nature. They worship stones, they worship rivers, they worship trees. Just like we have in India, we also worship trees, we also worship stones. We have the conceptual idea of the Mount Meru, which is actually a mountain. And they have such worship forms as well. And these people are, of course, were run over by the colonizers because the British used Australia as a place to extern their criminals. So once they served their term, they let out into the place and they have nothing to come back for. So all of them settled in the land and slowly built up what is now known as the modern nation of Australia. So it's largely the question of the white English and other people who migrated into that land and how they dominated the aboriginals who were not people who fight back and so on. They were just interested in getting drunk and high, and they would just roam around, and they were very spiritual kind of people who lived on at a very basic level. So they were dominated, and the whole land was taken over. And over the period of time, somewhere in the 19th century, early 19th century, they invaded some of the sacred parks that these people have. So Perth is, as I said, is a city in the western parts of Australia, has two such parks which have been uh, now quote unquote conserved and reused for modern as a modern facility. So that's the example I'll show you now, how a sacred land has been treated in the current scenario. This is the plan of the of the uh, of the area where you have it is called the King's Park also. Western Australian Botanical Garden is a part of that. It's a 400 to 500 acre land. And that land, out of that land, they have carved out about 18 acres as a as like a reserve for the traditional plants of Australia. Australia is very touchy about its original vegetation, and they don't allow you to import any organic material into Australia. It's a criminal offense if you do so. Even if you have soil under your shoe, that's an offense because you're bringing in germs and soil which are alien to the Australian land. So they have observed that over a period of time, the fabulous variety of vegetation that they had in the Australian subcontinent actually got all wiped out by invasive species which was brought in from outside by settlers. So these settlers cleared the forests and they cultivated their own thing. They brought seeds from abroad and they cultivated the place. They created cash crops. They created a whole economy around agriculture, which had an invasive nature on the old vegetation. So now the Australian government is very jealously trying to guard whatever is existing. And they have turned this what you see there in a circle is that green patch is that 400-500 acre sacred park of the Aboriginals, which is full of mountains and rock formations and valleys and springs and ponds, and all those were worshipped. The whole land was considered sacred by them, and within that they have created this botanical garden, which actually is on displaying all the basic varieties of original Australian plants, which do not come from outside. They belong to the land of Australia, and they planted that whole 18 acres of area with this kind of vegetation. And that has now become a reuse of a park, reuse of that old sacred landscape as a park. So it's a kind of repurposing of the parkland as a botanical garden. Even though it is there to preserve the diverse plant culture of Western Australia, this whole is now become a major tourist attraction. Here is an image of from where you enter into the park. You can see the city at the back, and this memorial that you see in the middle is actually very much at the point of entry of the park. And on the other side, this memorial is very much part of the entry. You enter the park from here like this, and what you see there are down there multi-story buildings, which the tip of which are showing from the city side. So this park is actually embedded within the city itself, and you can see a view of the city from the park, where this child is looking out at the city. You see a whole expand of the city all around it, of Perth City all around it. And but this has now become like a very important reserve for the indigenous vegetation. Now, these are some examples of the vegetation and the kind of signage they use. They have named all these plants, their species, their all details about these plants are available, and they are occasionally there are these what you can call urban furniture, which actually is used to display like these. This is like one suspended from this railing, you know, and it's suspended in the sky. And this bridge-like thing that you see is a metal bridge with which actually traverses across the valley of the park and is hovering above the land so that you don't destroy the land below, or you don't actually block the flow of the water that will be happening in the valleys. Here's another view of it, how these uh, parks are viewed. You can walk on this footbridge, and you can watch the various sides of the park, and it's kind of floating across the landscape of the valley. And from here, you can also look down at the. Sorry, see, of course, this is one of the sacred trees, which have been not of the originals, perhaps, but it's you can find the presence of these trees quite often here, and it's a very celebrated tourism spot. Here's another view of the same walkway. You can see how the walkway is like high up in the sky. Of course, they've lifted it by steel from here all the way up, supported it in the middle, and that's the walkway that's hovering across the landscape without destroying the landscape. These stones are actually original Aboriginal worship places, and that's another image of the bridge, you know. And here, what you see is at the edge of the park, the British had gone and created a beer factory there. In many cases, ironically, the colonial period saw these sacred gardens as places of superstition, and they built industrial uses there so that they destroy the plant, they destroy the landform, and they create industries there. So in this case, they created a beer plant. The beer plant is now not functioning. It's now conserved and is being turned into a kind of cultural facility. But that's the water that you see here. The city of Perth is right there. And this is at the tip of the same park. When you look down, these orange things that you see here in this are the part of the roofs of this structure. So this is the horrendous intervention that was done, which is now converted into not functioning as a beer factory anymore, but converted into a cultural facility. That's one example is of how this botanical garden has been created. Another example that I'm showing you is also from another sacred park of the Aboriginals, which is right there where you see is right here, is at this spot. And the earlier park that we saw is this one. So they're both right across the river, you know? And it is that river that is picturized in Aboriginal art here. This is the river, and to denote that these are sacred spots and there are locations of worship places here, the Aboriginals have conceptualized the idea of a snake that's winding across this landscape. It's brilliant graphics, actually. This is a painting from inside the Aboriginal Museum in Perth, and this is the detail of this head right here. Yeah, the head of the snake. So this snake is seen as the mythical snake, which is actually according sanctity to this old river basin. Yeah? So all these valley formations, these spaces that you see here, yeah, all these little estuaries and the lands around between the estuaries, everywhere near close to the estuaries, close to this estuary here, they have sacred spots, which are natural elements, and it is part of nature worship. Now, once again, this same place, just like in the other sacred park case, during the colonial period, they converted this into a factory site. So they set up a number of factories and gas station, gas turbines, electricity generation, and so on. In this around this, so it was a swampy area which is still worshipped by the Aborigines. They still, even now, they consider it sacred, and they do come here for some rituals. But right now, what the Australian government has done is they have done not like converting it into a plant reserve or anything, but actual physical intervention. So I want to show you the example of that physical intervention. It is somewhat reminiscent of what happened on the Sabarmati River in Ahmedabad. Not precisely so, because there is no embankment. Sabarmati is much more brutal than the way this place is intervened. But in effect, it is almost exactly the same thing, in the sense that they have reclaimed the land around it and converted that into a new urban estate, but quite nicely designed landscape and urban form. But that doesn't take away from the cruelty of taking over the sacred landscape and converting that into an urban amenity. So that is what the developed place now looks like. This is one of the swales which actually comes down. What you see here is one of the swales which actually goes to the Swan River. It flows down from here to the Swan River. That side is the Swan River. So what they are doing now, this was at one time, this was actually linked to various lake systems in Perth City. And this was an overflow channel of those Perth lakes. Now, most of those lakes, barring one or two, has now been built over and they've become dense urban areas, thereby drying up the flow of water into this location. So what they now do is they pump up the water from the river and they allow it to flow back into this channel, and that's the channel that you see. Now, it's not very different from what happened in Sabarmati Ashram. In Sabarmati Ashram, they would have built huge walls here in concrete and stepped it and made the real estate in this location. That's what Sabarmati Ashram did. They built up a wall, they filled the whole land, and created flat real estate spaces. Now, this is much more sensitively done. At least the manner in which the interface between the water and the land, the manner in which the interface is treated is quite sensitive, in the sense that it allows the merger of the land and the water into each other, and somewhat resembles the organic hold relationship that it had. It continues in different locations within varying heights. You can see that other one in this picture where you have a higher landscape, but similar rough treatment of the edges continue on the side, creating a kind of rippling flow of water and creating the sound of water, etc., etc. But they are all real estate assets. Let's not forget that this picturesque, beautiful looking landscape through which you can walk, it was actually originally a wild valley, a swampy area, which was restored to turn into a public asset, which then value adds the housing which comes around it. The image that you see on top is somewhere here. It rolls up, the landform rolls up like you can see here. And there are factories, old factories which are seated on it. They're all now shut. They're all now getting reused as art studios and so on and so forth. Typical examples that you see in cities. There's more images of the same place and how that the whole place has been treated. Here you can see some trees which are stranded in the middle of the water, has been anchored like this. I don't know how good this is for the tree, but that's another question. But the manner in which the whole place is treated, the interface between land and the way the land is rolling back into the river and valley and allows natural water when it rains for it to flow back into the stream and so on. These are very interesting moves. There's more views of the housing. This is what you see here on the side is the housing they developed. As you go down closer towards the river, you have more and more housing. And there, this is how it's going. And there are cycling tracks, there are walkways, etc., on the side of both sides of the water, which are our typical responses to water. Whether the Aboriginals have been priced out of this place now, it's too expensive for them to come and live here. So they don't live here anymore. They live in, I don't know, all kinds of crevices in the city. And they do come here for their ritual formations. This land is still sacred land for them. But it continues as now, in its current avatar, it continues as a priced real estate. There's more example of how finally the river, you can see the river, the stream coming from here and flowing back into the river. Goes into River Swan. And this is the housing that has been developed on site. Low-rise housing, you can say somewhat sensitively designed. You can see more built form here. They're not very high. They're low-key forms, ground plus 2 or 3 maximum, and their design is such that they are actually sitting on the landscape. So you can see the kind of details which are used in the treatment of the sites and the walkways, how the water catchment is carried and it goes back into the water flow goes back into the river, and so on. All these are very well detailed dimensions of the project. Though morally it raises a large number of questions. And there is this major bridge that goes across here. It's a suspension bridge. You can see it's a very large span, so they've been careful not to build any pillars in here to inordinately block or reduce the flow of the river, of the stream. And on both sides you have development that's happening. Here is one of the walkways and jogging track, which is a typical middle-class dream of jogging spaces on the riverside. Now, these are some examples of physical intervention. This is, for instance, how the landform is negotiated. As you go up, there is an inner street there. That's just a housing street. Whereas on this face, along the water, you have mixed use happening. And as you go up, it becomes more and more residential. But there are some small uses like artist studios and so on, which function from inside that street as well. Now, these are actually two different pictures. They look like one picture. This is one image of the community center, which is quite close to the water. And this is the walkway on the other side, other bank of the river, just on the other bank of the community center you see on top. And it moves parallel along the water. Now, this is an example of the housing street. It was time in late evening, and there was hardly any sun. So I didn't get a sparkling image for this. But however, it gives you the scale of development, which is not insensitive. It's not an attempt to overtly exploit the land, but it's an attempt to create a kind of physical space between houses, which can be used for children to play and walk and cycle and so on and so forth. And what you see here is one of the old factories in the electricity department's building, which has been restored in its original form. And here is where this street actually finally goes and merges there with the main road on top. And this is that spot where it merges with the main road, and you have a public art piece there. So these are typical contemporary interventions, but in terms of design, quite sensitively done, which actually override traditional sacred spaces. So that was about the two sacred parks and two varied kind of approaches to the sacred parks in Perth, in Australia. And now my last presentation is on the Rajiv Gandhi Memorial, which is in Sri Perumbudur, where he was assassinated. There's a competition, and I happened to win the competition. And now the project has been executed with lots of changes from the original proposals. But however, me being there in control of every change that took place and how I could modulate that change depending on the original vision of the whole place. So the original vision is, even though this is built nearly 20 years ago, this thing was built nearly 20 years ago. Uh, very interestingly, Louis Kahn's quote resonates with this project a lot because this also has an outdoor room, a roofless memorial, and is a complete integration of the landscape with the built form. Now, you cannot figure out whether it's a set of groups of structures in the garden or it's a garden which is surrounding these structures. It's so completely merged with each other, and it's very predominantly a garden, and at the same time, it also is an outdoor room. You know? So very uncannily, that's the quote which I ran into from Louis Kahn in 1973 when he made the proposal for that Freedom Park. The landscape work for this was done initially by Prelin Singh, but Muhammad Shahir found his way in between. And then after that, of course, it was totally controlled by Muhammad Shahir. And he did make some moves which I did not agree with. There was a direct conflict. And interestingly, in this case, I was taking the side of the landscape and he was taking the side of the built form. Yeah? So it was not built form actually in terms of the intervention. In my view, that intervention was too drastic, but he and the clients agreed with that interventionist view. So I'll just quickly show you the details of the scheme. So as I told you, when you visit the site for the first time, it's not a time when you analyze the site. It's not a time when you try to understand anything. It's a time when you try and feel the site. You get into a direct communion with the site. Okay? So there were a number of ponds on the site. I must tell you the background of the site is that it is about 40-45 kilometers away from northwest of Chennai, and it was part of a big rice belt. And 1,000 years ago, they built this whole ponding system where you had very huge ponds and very small ponds or intermediary sized ponds, which were all connected by an overflow system, which actually irrigated the entire paddy field area. So this was the rice bowl. The area was called Tonde Mandalam. That was the Tamil name for it. And that whole area was the rice belt of that part of Tamil Nadu. And that rice belt was actually watered by the series of ponds, interconnected ponds and streams, which then flow back into the Adayar River in Chennai. And this land actually falls, this is about 12 acres of land was identified for the memorial. And that land falls within that Tonde Mandalam space. And we had 2-3 of these small ponds. So when I was roaming around the site for the first time that I went there, I saw the pond. I saw a pond. It was evening time, of course. You can see the sun reflecting in it. And a frog just leapt into the water, creating these ripples. And I was very quick to capture that image because it was such a transforming image for me. And I remembered at that time this quotation by this man called Zen Buddhist called Basho. And Basho is a Japanese Buddhist poet. I don't know, his saint, whatever you want to call it, all rolled into one. And Basho wrote this book called The Narrow Road to the Deep North, and other travel stories. And I had read this book many years ago in the 70s. I had read this book, Basho's book, and I remembered this. He wrote in what is called the haiku style. And I remembered the lines where he talked about the frog leaping into the water. which is what is quoted here. I came back here, I hunted out the book again, and then I found the quote, and I have quoted it here. It says, breaking the silence of an ancient pond, a frog jumped into water, a deep resonance. Haikus are very short poems, and you can see the level of immersion that Mr. Basho experiences in watching this frog leaping into the pond. And I remembered that poem at that time. And I realized that what I have just seen in this pond, the frog leaping into it, is actually is resonating with my own psyche. Yeah? And I could feel that the transparency, the openness, the ripple effect that you see here, they are actually messages for me to take forward. So I conceptualize the whole memorial as a transparent, open landscape without a roof. You know, expecting that the ripples of the functions that we put in here will spread far and wide. Yeah? So this image, even though I don't know whether it sounds far-fetched to you, it's not far-fetched for me. It's very real for me. This image, this is like 20-year-old photograph. Yeah? 20 years back, more than 20, 94, 95 is when this picture was taken. You know? And for me, this image of this sparkling, transparent water with ripples and the Basho poem and the resonance and the silence, the ancientness of the pond, all that played upon my psyche. And that, let me tell you, that informed the way I approached the project, and that became the conceptual base on which I relied entirely in the project. Yeah? Is this, just this one image and my recollection of Basho's poem. Now, in the Rajiv Gandhi, when I started working on the Rajiv Gandhi, the Never Come, that was a time when Rajiv Gandhi had just gone through the Bofors scandal. Yeah? And I was a keen reader of the Bofors scandal every day on the front line of newspapers, and especially the Indian Express. And I was not entertaining any empathy towards the man at the time. You know? And I was going through this conflict when I was invited to do this project for the competition. It was an invited competition between 5 people. And when I was invited to do this, I was going through tremendous conflict of how to resolve this lack of empathy I have for this man with designing a memorial for him. Okay, so then one of the people working with me, a gentleman called Siddharth Mitra, who's an SPA graduate in architecture, he's a saint. He's still a saint, and he's an architect working in my studio. He told me that unless you remove this toxicity from your mind, they cannot approach this design. I realized that I have to park my baggage somewhere and I have to start afresh and enter the project innocently rather than carrying the load of all my negative feelings that I had in my mind. So that's how I was able to take a fresh insight into the whole project. That time, I did not read about other memorials. I did not read about any buildings. I didn't read about any urban design, no architecture, nothing. I was reading poetry and philosophy. That was my way of getting out of that whole toxic baggage that I was carrying. You know? So that's how I rediscovered many things, many related things, and I was able to construct a set of contexts which will inform my project. So the first and most important context was what you call the spot, is the place where Rajiv Gandhi fell when he was assassinated. As you know, that he was very treacherously blasted by a bomber who was actually pretending to put a garland on him while she pulled the bomb. Yeah, And that is the spot, what you see here, this little white shed-like thing was a temporary structure erected around the spot where his body was dismembered into a number of pieces and his head was found in one place. Yeah, this is the spot. This white building that you see here is the spot where the body was found here. And the picture that you have here on the side is the soil in which his body was found, in his neck, in his head was found. Yeah, and this spot in my mind had actually merged with the blood of the man, and that is a very potent symbol of the land. How the whole spot gets value added is by the death of this brutal betrayal and the death of the man and the blood that he shed on this land. And this soil has actually soaked in that blood. So I realized that if I want to take my idea of the transparent water and the ripple forward, I need to consecrate the spot in some way. So I decided that this spot will become my fulcrum, and it defined the first element of context in the work. Now, then of course, the land itself, this is the land before anything was built. You can see that land was not free of human activity. That's a pathway of which villagers used to do. And what you see in the background there is actually the Shikhara of the Sri Perumbudur temple. Sri Perumbudur town goes back to 10th century, and it was designed and built by Ramanujacharya. Ramanujacharya, who propagated an idea called Vishishta Advaita. That is, it's called, in English, it's called qualified monism. Yeah? So the fusion of Atma and Paramatma, which is there in Shankara's theory, he modifies it to say that the Atman who perceives the Paramatma is an entity also. Yeah, but they are the same. So it's called qualified monism. And this is a temple in Sri Perumbudur. What you see, this little white spot is the spot where the temple is located. And you can see that this path is going almost straight into this. This gave me an idea that this is going to be one of my reference points, this line. Yeah? And there you have the pond in which I saw the frog leaping in. Yeah? And here is a representation of the water and sun, the combination of which actually creates fertility. Yeah? Can bring life anew in a place of death and sadness. It can bring life anew if we are able to combine water and the sun. Now, so these land, water, and climate become my central reference points for the way I conceive the project. Now, here on the side is the idea of people. So we have three things. We have nature, we have human activity, we have built form, and we have people. Yeah? So people are also a great set of contexts. The nature of the people, your understanding of the people, that gives you a nature of the context. Yeah? So this is actually an image of people who were visiting this spot. By then, about 2,000-3,000 people used to come to visit the spot at that time, average on the day. Yeah? All the pilgrims who were going to Tirupati would stop here, visit Rajiv Gandhi Memorial, and stand there with folded hands and with great reverence, and they would go back. For them, it was no matter whether he was a congressman or a communist or a BJP, it didn't mean anything to them. They are ordinary farmers for whom here is a man who was a prime minister of India and he's dead here, so pay respect to his soul. So there is a reverential approach which they showed me the way to that reverential approach. Next to that is the image of Thiruvalluvar. Of course, this came up much later. It was not there present at that time. But this Thiruvalluvar statue is like 40 odd meters tall. You know? This is the Vivekananda rock in Kanyakumari. And right next to that, they built this Thiruvalluvar memorial. And this Thiruvalluvar is a very interesting man. He lived in the 2nd century AD, and he wrote the most important Tamil text called Tirukkural. He was a Jain saint, and he wrote Tirukural, which is even today taught in schools in Tamil Nadu. Tirukural is a kind of universal text accepted by the entire Tamil population and is also considered very high end of Tamil. So he actually represents in the depth of the idea that's embodied in him goes very deep, and that depth is expressed in Tamil culture as in scale. That's why they have a penchant for these very high paper cutouts of Jayalalitha and MGR and Rajinikanth and all that you see in, I don't know how many of you have been to Chennai, but those who have been to Chennai, I'm sure Dr. Sridharan will understand this very well. Those who've been to Chennai will know that there is a desire for this scale, which is part of a public culture of the Tamil people. Yeah? So the scale, I knew, was an important ingredient that could be brought here as a context. Then we have here the image of Ramanujam, who was a mathematician. Don't mistake him for Ramanujacharya. Ramanujacharya was the 10th, 11th century philosopher, poet. And Ramanujam also came from not far away from this Sriperumbudur area, but he is a mathematical genius. Yeah? And Mr. Ramanujam actually exemplifies that ingrained ability of the Tamil to relate to the numbers. Yeah? It's a very specific characteristics of the Tamil. That's why even today, the Tamils and the Telugus who are so adept with numbers actually dominate the entire electronic cities across the world. They are all over the place because of their special aptitude, special talent for mathematics. So this idea of mathematics as a point of departure became an important concept for me, considering that the people actually have inherent in them innate capability to deal with numbers. Then what you see next to that, the image that you see next to it is writings on the walls of the Tanjore temple. The Tanjore temple is about 1,000 years old, and the whole base of the temple is full of these inscriptions describing how the donations have been made to the temple, who gave the donations. You can almost read the history of Tamil Nadu by reading these scripts. So this became also an interesting idea which I wanted to take forward because it's something that was ingrained in the people. Now, similarly, there are issues about the built form. Those are all, perhaps you can call them non-tangible issues. Here there are more tangible issues where the built form traditions of the area became very important ingredient that could be brought in here. Because the full locality, including Kanchipuram, Sriperumbudur, and all those places around there are all full of fabulously built temples in stone. Not just built, but built and carved in stone. So this capability of the people to do carving is a skill that still exists in Tamil Nadu. The kind of Chola sculptures they did, the immaculate sculpture they did, 1,000 years ago, even now they can recreate those sculptures. So they have the capacity even now. It's ingrained in the Tamil people, the skill to do craft work and crafting on stone. And the evidence of that is all over the place. Here you have the temple of the Adikeshwara Perumal, which you are able to see in access from the Rajiv Gandhi Memorial. This is the tank in Kanchipuram, and the tank became a source of inspiration for me. These are actually wayfarers' temples, attached to temples, where people take rest around the water. They bathe, they wash, they do all kinds of things. And there, the water is considered sacred. Now, what you see here is the construction system in stone of just the plain beam and lintel system. And this became also a source for me. And this is a sculpture from Kanchipuram. And what you see here is the temple in in Sriperumbudur, where you can see that the column and the stone beam and the roofing is done with stone slabs. You know? So the tradition to build in this form is inherent in the place, and these buildings have already they've been around for 1,000 years, and nothing has happened to them. Yeah. So I realized that if I want to create an architecture which is at least become an elegant ruin, if it doesn't live for 1,000 years, if it breaks down, it'll be still an elegant ruin. Then I must use these techniques of building and the material and the skill that you find in construction in this area as one of my sources, my context. So I use these building traditions as my context. What you see in the middle is the Arjuna's penance, the famous sculpture piece, bas-relief in Mahabalipuram. And this becomes the source of the central piece of my second stage of the design. I'll show you that subsequently. Now, here is a very interesting quote from the Sri Ganapati Sthapati. Ganapati Sthapati is one of the foremost important Sthapatis of Tamil Nadu. He represents the traditional school. He said the whole universe is subject to a mathematical formula, and architecture is yet another manifestation of this formula. In other words, through mathematics, you can enter the entire universe, and applying it at different scales, you create even a room. That's the fundamental principle of Vastu system, where interrelatedness of all things in the universe is central to the idea of Vastu. So every room, every building becomes a microcosm of the universe. They're just in different scales. The space that you enclose in a room is universal space. We are trying to confine them in rooms, but they are actually not confinable. It's something that pervades the entire universe, space. So mathematics is used as a method of creating. Mathematics becomes the tool with which you understand how the universe is structured, and that structure is then translated into architecture. So, as I said in the beginning of the first presentation, a clear understanding and the derivative of the principles from the existing can yield a proposal which is in harmony with the existing. That's the fundamental principle that's embedded even in this quote. Now I'll quickly show you, I'm taking a lot of time, I'll just quickly show you this intervention thing. This is actually how the entire space was structured. I did not call it architecture, structure of architecture. I called it the architecture of space. So first thing was to ensure that the spatial flow and spatial connections in the project are retained as my idea of a transparent flowing space. The space had to be first defined. So the anchor that I got was the view of what you can see on the left. Here is the Shikara of the Sriperumbudur temple. And with a theodolite, I marked the axis of that in straight line to the spot, to that place where you saw the red earth, that spot, and connected that as one line of my project. Here you had a statue of Indira Gandhi here. It's after garlanding this statue that he came here like this, and he went there and he got blasted in that spot. So this became another point for me of departure for me. So that I get parcels where I'll intervene, I differentiate the land in such a way that these views are unhindered. So what you see here as the form, this is the open memorial that was conceived with 7 columns without a roof, and an open to sky memorial where the soil that was soaked with his blood will be visible and will be open to elements. This was the original concept of the project. And here is a photographic visual of the same thing. And this line is this line you see here. Is this line. That's a model which I had produced for the competition, and this is the model which won me the project. And this was made by using paper. You know? This is white paper. I still have this model with me, and it's still intact. Nothing's happened to it. It was made by someone called Dhruvajyoti Ghosh, also an architect from SPA, was working in my studio, and it was a really skilled model. You can see that this axis has been maintained here, this axis here, as well as this axis here going to the Indira Gandhi statue. And the buildings are not obscuring these locations. And that these 7 columns here are the expression of scale. I'll show you details of it. This is how they have been configured as a space. You have the spot, and you have 7 columns which are located around it in an elliptical form, not in a circular form. A circle has just one center. An ellipse has 2 centers. And one of the centers is the place where he is fallen. The other center is the center that connects with the rest of the universe. We'll have to move a little faster because it's rather getting late. Now, here is a section of the whole project where we have a museum here. That's one of the water bodies here, which was in the earlier plan you must have seen, which has been conserved and expanded into this tank. And this whole thing is a simulation of the resting place of the pilgrims in the temple tower. So you have a stone colonnaded veranda that passes through all the way around the water, and it exits into this place. So you can approach it here from here and then go through around this place, go through this memorial, and then enter this. And here in between water, you have these museum structures, then exits into a whole system of buildings and courts and open air and closed air and courts and all that, and everything is buried under the mound. It's only single story, and when you look at the memorial from here, you will only see the landform and not the building. This is how it was conceptualized, but this part never got built. Okay, that's another story. So this finally got modified into having a carved wall here to receive this land. Carved wall here like this. I'll show you the next project. And now that's how finally the project shaped up from what it was. Here is the view to the temple Shikara, and here is the view to this is all buried in the mount. So here is the view to the Indira Gandhi Memorial. This is the original path he walked on, but the Tamil Nadu MPs were quite keen on the Vastu system, and they wanted the entrance to happen from this end towards the east and not from here. So I had to notionally mark this and create a new form which will come around here and people enter from here. As you enter here, you can see this, but you cannot go right through. It guides you like this, landscape guides you like this and takes you there. Okay, but these columns still remain as open to sky and without anything. This is the Pan Mathematical Center, which is the second phase, which is actually in response to Ramanujam and his penchant for mathematics. Where through mathematics, you can study every science, every art. The entire Vastu system in Tamil Nadu is based on mathematical formula. Sculpture is based on mathematics. Cities are planned based on mathematics. The universe is studied based on mathematics. So mathematics is one subject from where you can enter from any place and reach anywhere in the universe. So the idea was to create a Pan-Mathematical Research. This is the Pan-Mathematical Research Institute, from where they will study through mathematics things like music, traditional art forms, traditional town planning, artificial intelligence, current theories in evolution, all that will be studied through mathematics from this place. Unfortunately, this was the active side of the memorial, but this part has never got built. Yeah? Only this part has got built and this has been built. Yeah? I'll show you the details of this part. This is how the 7 columns appear. These 7 columns actually are part of the brief. The brief did not prescribe what should happen here. Brief simply described the 7 principles around which Rajiv Gandhi had organized his life. And it was open to the architect to interpret how to represent it on the site. So my representation was to actually create the scale. Each of these columns, these are 15 meters high, yeah, and about 1.2 meter diameter. Okay, and they are built in complete stone and lime. There's no concrete at all anywhere. Even in the foundation, there's no concrete. You know? The entire project is conceived with only lime and stone, because that's what the traditional materials are. Cement has a limited life, and it will not create an elegant ruin. You know? So here is how the columns have been described. Textured, yeah, and each of these textures a different texture, and each column carried one texture. And finally, the Tamil Nadu MPs again prevailed in saying that, you know, we think this is inauspicious to have a column which has no base and a head. You know, in Tamil Nadu, we always have a base and a head. My idea was to create silence and not noise. You know? But they insisted that there should be something on top. So finally, Kapila Vatsyayanji came up with the idea that there are these 7 elements in the Vedas which we could represent on top of this. And the artist Ram Sutar was hired to help make those. This is now as it is built. It's completely in stone and lime. There's no cement anywhere. This is, you enter from here, and this is what takes you on that long walk to the memorial spot. And every place, trees actually define the location from where shift of movement takes place. It's another image of, there's a sense of place there. And from here, you come from here and you take a nearly 90-degree turn to move towards the memorial from here. It's marked only by a tree and not by any signage or any structures or anything. This is the built landform of that whole space, of how the memorial walk actually begins. People come from here like this, and they take this route right up to the memorial. And this goes to the other part, the active part of the memorial from here. And also this becomes the VIP entry, so that VIPs can come and park at the back there, and they can enter from here and go to the memorial. So this is how finally it turned out after the Tamil Nadu MP's ideas of having a capital on top. So from the Vedas, these 7 items were sculpted and placed on. It was a very tough task to place on an already built stone column without any concrete or steel. To load these with this metallic stuff was like really a heavy job. But it was CPWD's ability that they were able to execute it. The project was executed by CPWD. Here are more views of it. This is how the central part was finally turned out. It didn't remain a square. But however, this square platform that you see here is floating above the soil where his head fell. There's an example of that. That's how finally the memorial turned out. That is a stone embedded portrait of Rajiv Gandhi there, which is central to this path, actually in access to this path. And that is how the detail of that platform is done. That what you see in red color is the original soil where his head had fallen. Sonia Gandhi had really taken to this idea that that could be open to elements. And finally, she conceded to the committee, which was pressurizing to bring in artisans from Delhi and so on, she considered the idea that provided this nothing is built on top of that soil, it's okay with her. So we developed this detail to be able to carry the stone slab across here, and a detail to carry the load of this central piece. And this is how it is finally executed. That's another view. The picture that you just saw before this was taken much later. This was originally when it was built, these pieces on top were in original anodized color, but subsequently the Tamil Nadu people have gone and painted it gold because their value is in gold. So it's totally transformed the form, but that's the kind of changes that one can expect in a place like this. And these are the paths which actually, after you leave the memorial, you move on this path and you reach a bas-relief here, which actually replaces our museum. The museum idea was abandoned because they felt that in a remote location like this, there won't be anyone to even change a bulb if it fuses in that museum. So it will be in a state of disuse all the time. So it's better to have something which is more weatherproof and sustainable in terms of the open sky. So I then took recourse to the idea of the Arjuna's penance open bas-relief in Mahabalipuram, and hired Mr. Ramachandran, A. Ramachandran, who's an artist, to conceptualize and draw and get this executed in stone. So the whole structure, about 120 feet long structure, was made here, about 20 feet, that's about 6 meters high. And at the back of this is filled with soil. So this becomes a kind of terminal visual element in the whole pathway. This is when you look back from that pathway. Here is the view of the bas-relief. What you see here, this is the bar. This whole thing is the bas-relief. Yeah. You enter this spot here, and you go through like this. And the bas-relief actually depicts the progress of India and its final point as an industrial and developed nation. So it starts with the jungle and the village life and so on and so forth, and finally ends up in a kind of developed industrial nation, which was the vision of the Congress Party at that time. So that's a close-up of the same bas-relief. As I told you, the Tamil artisans still retain enormous skill in carving. This is all carved in grey granite stone. It's not drawn. It's not a drawing. It's a carving in grey granite stone. And the whole thing is exposed to the elements. You can see how wonderfully they have carved the whole space, and how, in terms of the relationship between the foliage and of these elements, how there's perfect harmony between the two of them. More examples of the same thing, but thematically it keeps changing, and you get the rural life, settled rural life happening here, planting, kind of all that is happening here, and trees and foliages are represented very beautifully using traditional language. The drawings, detailed drawings, were given by Ramachandran as the artist, but it's the Tamil artisans who actually converted that into full-scale carved entities. It was an enormous skill that was displayed. There were 300 stonemasons working on the site at one time, and it took us nearly 10 years to finish the project. So here is how what a restrained landscape treatment was done. This is done by Shahir. I mean, it was part of the drawing was created, the basic layout was created by us, but Shahir did all these detailing of these water catchments and to catch the water that comes out of the slopes, and so that it doesn't go and settle in this memorial area. And as you exit, you enter into what is called a facility center, where you have toilets and small offices and the electrical substation and so on. This is the only building that is built on this part of the site, on the phase one of the site. It's a very small building in stone, single story, completely in stone and lime. even the roofs, as you see here, these roofs are all in stone, and that's line joints that you see there. This is using the techniques that you saw in the earlier studies from Kanchipuram and so on, and some of them from also from the Brihadishwara temple. So this kind of stone and lintel, column and lintel business with these brackets are of course contemporary. It's our design, but it's an interpretation of the column and the stone brackets. So this is like an empty space. The more you come from the hot sun and you enter into this fabulous space, which has got these two trees and it's lined by these trees. It has this kind of a, it's not an archway, but it's a kind of porous entry through which you enter into that space. And here we have the facility center building. There's another view as you are exiting the project. This is the coordinated walkway, and that what you see at the back is the building. More views of it, and all of them are completely integrated with the landscape. So the architecture complements the landscape, and the landscape complements the architecture. More views of it, how entirely green the whole thing is, and how stone sits so naturally and so simply. The main idea is that we will not have an ornate building with lots of carvings. We have restricted only to that, the main bas-relief. The rest of it are all contemporary construction techniques. I issued 70 drawings only for this area. Our office issued 70 drawings to be able to construct this in stone and in the inner lining of brick. This is the rear portion from where, as I told you, behind the bas-relief, the earth embankment has been built up. And this is the steps which lead up to the top there. And from there, you can look back at the memorial. It's just a static space with trees, and it's a restful place. This is behind the facility. This is what you see here is the facility center building, which is also built entirely in stone and lime. This is towards the exit. When you exit the project, we are about to exit. From here, we exit. This is the tree where we started, took the turn to go to this one. And this is looking back at that same structure, the facility center's enclosure structure, which is very simple and almost floating in the landscape. This is a view from outside the road. This is the compound, also in stone. Also in stone. This is the only place where steel has been used, so that we can maintain a very high level of porosity, visual porosity from the road. So as people are moving on the highway, they can see deep into the project, into the landscape that's created inside. And all these are stone. This is when you look back, as you're leaving from the gate, you look back at the memorial. It's the only little pond that has been saved in that location. Originally, I had a large pond which was saved. Then one fine day, they decided to have a big meeting of the Congress party here. And they were scared that people are going to fall into the pond. So they wanted to close it. I disagreed with it. That's the point when they brought in Shahir, and Shahir helped them to close it. I had written a specific line in my report saying that the closing of these ponds will finally lead to flooding downstream. And that's precisely what happened in 2015. That is a good 20 years after the project, that the Chennai was flooded. Because all these Tonde Mandalam ponds have been closed. And it's created much more silting of the existing ponds, a lot of runoff. Huge, humongous factories have come up everywhere, all concretized. And the entire water management system, which has been functioning very well for 1,000 years, was destroyed by intervention. We were able to save this little patch of water in this land. So this is the view that you see when you look back towards the project. So that is the project. Now we can have 15 minutes of question answer session. I'm sorry I exceeded the time a bit. I can talk another whole day about the problem, but that's what happened. Yeah. So
Thanks.
open to discussions, questions, reflections, additions, changes, disagreements, anything. Open.
Uh, Yes, thanks a lot, sir. That was wonderful presentation, and you have shown us another way of reading urban landscape through emotions, relationships, context, locality, patterns of structure, and mythical landscape to study and design urban landscapes sensibly, and to create livable experiences for the city. So, open to the audience. I would like to open to the audience if they can have any questions they can ask directly to sir. Um,
Yes, ma'am. This is Karthik again from Design
sure, sure,
Department.
sure. Yes, go
Ravindra
ahead.
sir was very informative, sir, because I am from that place, Sripuram,
All right.
Tamil Nadu. I'm from
You're
Chennai.
from Perumbavoor?
And I can totally also
Hmm.
relate to you actually talked about the political issues which you are facing while going through that project right now, sir.
Yeah.
Because during after my graduation, I had a opportunity to work on the Jayalalitha Memorial Ka project.
Oh, okay. All right.
So while I can actually totally relate to that because most of the things which we do, even over there, it gets changed over time, and most of the things get out of our control also. And
But I actually hung on.
yes, sir, yes, sir. We all try to do that actually during those kinds of projects. And I really loved the way how you related the Tamil culture to that Rajiv Gandhi ka memorial itself. Because the irony is, he was assassinated by the Tamil people for some political issues with them, but still, after even his death, their culture is being reflected in that place itself. So many Tamil people started to come over there to see that.
Yeah.
Because you did that, many Tamil people came forward to see his memorial, or else they would have not even come over there.
Well, you see, once he's dead, once he becomes a memory,
Yes, sir.
he's something else.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
It's no more the politics of Sri Lankan Tamils and
Yes, sir. Yes.
assassination. And it's no more that. But
Yes.
one thing was to be kept in mind all the time is that this is not a place of celebration because it's a
Yes.
place of death. But at the same time, it's not a place of mourning.
Yes, sir.
It is a it is a it's a place where you internalize
Yes, sir.
the various elements which are there. Yeah.
Even now in Tamil Nadu, it's a very famous place. Anybody comes to Chennai, they go to Sripuram. That is actually in middle of a nowhere, sir.
Yeah. Yes, that's what it's in the
That's
middle.
especially because you bought that जो Tamil culture है उसमें just to see that people come over there at least.
Thank you. I'm happy to hear that.
I totally agreed with Karthik. I totally agreed with it. It is a wonderful project.
Thank you. It's an example of how there's no distinction between urban design, landscape, culture. It's all one thing.
Yes, sir.
Yes,
Yes.
sir, yes.
It's about how you articulate your own assimilations of all this. So context is not just defined narrowly as the next road or next building or the tree or any such physical elements alone. Context has a very deep meaning, historic meaning, meaning of ideation, the history of ideation, mythology, everything that's connected.
Yes, sir. And a small doubt. Yes, but
Yes, Karthik.
and this Australian project also, sir, which you had shown.
Yeah.
So, are those places still being a place of worship for those
Yes,
Aboriginals?
yes, they are. They are still places of worship. During their holy days, those populations come here and conduct some rituals of their own. But they're completely marginalized now. They're just drunken people. They're ruined themselves. They're unable to deal with modernity. They're ruined. They just drink and get stoned, and they're like just become like vagabonds in the city. They
Yes,
have
sir.
been destroyed as a people because all their senses have been stymied by building factories in their sites and so on. And finally, what is left of them is just they are just not even second class but third class citizens in their own
Yes,
land. No,
yes. And they are not even living in those places right now.
no, they
That's
are not
the
living those places.
irony, because when I see those projects, it's like they got a really good story,
Yeah.
and then they use that story to benefit themselves basically.
Well, yeah, that's right. It's just been used as a resource, commercial resource now.
Yes,
Yeah, that's a fact. Yeah. But however, the interventions are very interesting interventions.
yes, sir. That is
The land form and the build form, how they are integrated through design, that is very well done.
because I feel, at least after in coming years, the designer who is doing those would also take a stand in those social responsibilities,
Well,
because I feel there is a he has a very much major role in shaping those responsibilities, right,
yes,
Nasir?
but he should have just gone there and worshipped that scanty land, not done the design that he did. So there is a moral dilemma here. No,
Yes.
does does good design replace these mythologies of land? Can it
Yeah.
replace it? It cannot replace it. No.
So what is that good design then, sir?
That's a question that you need to ask. That's why I showed that project.
Yes, there is, sir.
It has such a contradictory content in it. At the same
Yes,
time, you go there, it's a very beautiful space to walk in. The
yes, sir.
scale, the manner in which the landscape is treated, the streetscapes are treated, the water-land interface is treated, the bridges, the use of the place by people. It's very, very enchanted place.
Yes,
But at
sir.
the same time, when you look back at the history of this kind of exploitation and brutalization of a whole population and taking over of their sacred land, it's something else. You know. So there are all these contradictory things that we face as designers.
Yes, sir.
You know? So it's how do you enter such a project?
Yes,
That's
sir.
something which there can't be any prescriptions for that. It's something that every individual has to ideate and go through.
While ideating, he can address those issues also, sir. For example, that could not only be an urban place, but also they could have moved certain aboriginals to live over in that place also, where they can start their life over.
I don't know. These are all driven by real estate and big money and
Yes,
land value and all kinds of things. Because Perth city was not a settlement earlier. Now it
yes.
has become a big city with two huge universities and the schools of
They're just giving them back what
architecture.
they took it from them. They are making a good story out of it, but are they giving it back to them? I don't think so.
Ask yourself that question. Put yourself in the shoes of that place
Yes,
and decide, take a call on it. That's all I can say. But it was a very revealing example for me to look at how
yes.
mythical landscapes are treated, and we are still doing that here.
Thank you very much, sir. It
Thank
was
you.
very informative.
Uh, so Vishakha here would like to
Yes,
reflect on your
how are you?
project.
How are you?
I am fine, sir.
Uh,
And of course, there is no point telling you how learning it is to hear you speaking so passionately about the project. But yes, we are all learning from you continuously. I have two three points to share.
yeah,
One, I thought looking at especially the Rajiv Gandhi's memorial as a project,
yeah,
that aesthetics comes from thinking and it is not always coincidental. So you have to make that effort to pull in.
yeah.
Uh,
You
Second,
have
what
to
I
make, you have to make the connections.
yes, you have to make the
Right? They
connection.
exist there. You have to recognize the connection. Rather.
Yeah, but I think it needs a lot of maturity which you have, and everybody has
It
to.
needs full immersion, Vishaka.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Full
I
immersion
totally.
into the idea, into the place, into the people, into the land. that immersion is what actually informs the way you think.
Yes, and it is so vocal in the way you have explained the project. The second was also that I found that there is a discipline of a profession, but then there was so much of freedom given for expression, because even for traditional artists to express, and maybe that also created that kind of a magic where you have stringent lines, but then there is complete freedom given to them.
Yes, in
So,
fact, it's not just a question of freedom, Shaka, in this project.
yeah.
There was a very senior Sthapati in charge of the whole thing, and
Mhm,
he was even my structural designer.
mhm,
He was
mhm,
not just a Sthapati who was kind of getting his people to carve.
mhm,
He was a very senior Sthapati,
mhm.
Sthapati, and he was the main Sthapati of the Kanchipuram temple. Kanchipuram,
Uh-huh.
the Sri,
Oh,
where Shankara wrote the Saundarya Lahari, the Kamakshi temple.
uh-huh.
Main restorer of that temple, and he
Mhm,
was from a lineage of Sthapatis. And
mhm,
that man was a short, diminutive man, very humble. He stood
mhm.
like a student in front of me, but he was handling many times more uh, in crores projects in his own hands. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
He was building temples across the world.
Yeah,
The man was so humble and so humane. You know? And
yeah.
I was like a student to him. Yeah.
Yes, we all.
And he decided how thick the stone slab should be to span, to do that span.
Uh-huh,
He
uh-huh,
decided how to select the stone to be able to cut the curved beams that I had.
uh-huh.
He did the whole thing.
Mhm,
And I
mhm.
only convert his what he gives me as prescriptions into drawings, which can be then issued to CPWD. Then who will depend on him.
Yeah.
We also
Uh,
had a very interesting contractor,
uh-huh,
a Tamil contractor, who
uh-huh,
was not just an ordinary contractor. He
uh-huh,
had massive labor welfare schemes going. He had
uh-huh.
all the nearby hospitals to treat all these people when they fall sick and they have fever and so on. And he is the one who finally chose the name Rajiv Gandhi Ninay Vakam.
Mhm,
The
mhm.
contractor who chose the name. Yeah.
Yeah.
And because he's quintessentially Tamilian,
Uh-huh,
he knows the meaning of agam.
uh,
In Tamil poetry, there is in the medieval, not even medieval, in the
mhm,
Sangam poetry, there is a
mhm.
tradition of agam and puram poetry.
Yes.
Yeah. Puram poetry is the external descriptions of external, kind of seasons and stories and so on. And
Uh-huh.
agam poetry are internal poems,
Mhm, mhm.
poems which deal with internal emotions. Yeah.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
this word Akam, Rajiv Gandhi, Ninay Vakam was coined by him.
Uh-huh.
I was struggling to find a name for it, a name to which those people can connect.
Yeah.
Call it memorial, it's another memorial.
Yeah. Yeah.
When you say Ninay Vakam, it means a place where his memory is enshrined,
Oh.
internalized.
Uh-huh.
That name came from the contractor.
Uh-huh.
It,
Uh,
that's the kind of relationship we had with the people who are producing the place. Yeah.
it surely reflects completely on the way it has come out. No, sir, but wish to ask you this, because does it ever strike you that people should understand the entire thinking process, or are you happy with people exploring it as a piece of art?
See, actually, I'm happy if they feel peaceful in that location.
Mm-hmm.
I don't care if they appreciate art, they don't appreciate art. What we have
Uh,
tried to do is to create a place where his memory is enshrined.
yeah.
It's not about his violent death or the Sri Lankan conflict or LTTE, or it's not about all that. All that is over.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Now,
Mm-hmm.
what is its new form? How is it living now? So you
Yeah.
give a new lease of life by intervention, and that
Mm-hmm.
intervention basically aims to create a place of peace. I would suggest, Shaka, if you get the time ever, go and
Yes.
visit this place.
Yeah, I'll surely.
Take a photograph.
After today, yes, I will. I really agreed with 2 points in your entire presentation. Was one that the columns of silence should have really left like that, because the capital really destroys that silence.
I think so too. Yes,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and the second was also that making the pond small is a disaster,
Yeah,
surely,
for-
because it has.
closed at all.
Yeah, because the water, the way it gives you that peace, suddenly got reduced into a small
That is
pond.
where, for the first time, I got into a conflict with that committee.
Ha, ha, ha,
And
ha.
that's how Shahir entered and he closed the
Ha.
pond.
Oh,
As
that was
landscape
really.
They asked me, "Do you have any objection?" Your colleague, Professor Shahir, if we bring him in, do you have any objection? I said, I have no objection. He's a very good designer. I respect him a lot. So do
Mhm.
bring. So, but then the first thing he did was closing the pond.
Yeah.
So
So
that
surely lot to learn from you about the Agam. So surely I'll get in touch with you.
yeah, certainly, yeah.
Yeah. And we really move on forward from where you leave us at this point. So let's see how more we can explore the things.
Let me also tell you that I have
Yes.
given a whole list of survey methodologies.
Uh-huh.
I left it, I've given it to Anupama and requested her
Okay.
to share it. Okay.
Okay.
Sir, I
Those
had
are-
shared already. Sir, I had already shared it.
All right, all right. Thank you. Thank you for that. And those are actually the nuts and bolts of it, which anybody
Yeah.
can work out.
Yeah.
But the ideation process and the value base that you carry with your ideas,
Yes.
that is what is far more important when you actually study the urban landscape.
That's very true.
Yeah?
Yes.
That compassion for life,
Mhm.
compassion and respect for every form of life, that's so critical when we look at anything, whether it's a building or a tree or a space or a city. So that's
Very
what I try to emphasize. I
Sir,
think yeah.
one question can I ask, sir? Karthik.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Sir, about that Sri Peramadur and the memory of the incident.
Yeah.
Oh, it was not only Rajiv Gandhi who was blasted over there.
16 people died, Karthik.
Yes,
There.
sir.
16 people. And I had a separate memorial on the other side.
Okay.
It was never built. On the same site, another location, I had a big memorial for the policemen who died.
Because don't you think that same memorial should not only signify his death, but also the incident which took place
Yeah.
and all the lives who were present over there?
Absolutely. I fully agree with you on that. And I had provided for it, but that's unfortunately the time after the first phase was built, the government in the center changed. Yeah. Congress lost the election and a new government came and the whole thing was shelved by them.
Yes.
Otherwise, we would have had that huge triangular building with complete solar panels on the roof 20 years ago, mind you. We would have had that building standing there, and that was the library. It was
Yes.
never built, and all this memorial was never built. The Pan Mathematical Research Center was not built. They shelved everything. So now only half the land is developed,
Yes, sir.
unfortunately.
That was that doubt I actually had on that.
And Congress has never been able to get up after that in Tamil Nadu.
Yes, I understand.
So
And
I don't know if ever they want to do the next phase. Even if I'm lying on flat on my grave, I would like to do it.
And don't you also think that apart from the ideologies which it's or the idea which an urban design or a memorial or some intervention projects could also help in contributing the local area people who are there in those areas also.
That was the
Some
purpose of
kind
the
of business model.
That is the purpose of the library. There was also a children's center there in the library,
Okay.
which would have had the local children come and learn science and
Yes,
mathematics.
sir. Yes, sir.
Yeah. There was an open library for them.
Because anything which we do should have the purpose.
Yes.
Purpose
And
is
that was
truly-
how the local connect could have been built with the area, with the
yes,
locality.
sir. Because right now I feel even though if we do that architectural projects, many of our solutions are superficial. It only relies on जैसा वो दिखता है, कैसा एक्सपीरियंस होता है, ओके वो सब है, और उसके बाद उसका पर्पस क्या है उसका लोगों के लिए. What more can it do other than just looking good or feeling good उस place में?
Yeah, that's all very true. But there's not just one person who takes the call.
Yes,
There are
sir, because
all big
that's not embedded in the teachings.
national political forces at play.
Yes.
And that time, Jayalalitha was very friendly with the Congress.
Yes, sir. Yes.
He was proactive in giving us the land, allotting that land.
That time when Vajpayee uska problem ho raha tha, I understand that.
No, with the Congress itself, she fell apart.
Yes.
So finally, the entire political equation was not adding up. Therefore, the second phase never got built. The active part never got built.
Yes, sir.
That's unfortunate. But my idea was to demonstrate how integrally an environment can be seen, not as landscape as separate from the built form, and built form not as separate from the landscape.
Yes, sir.
How they can be completely integrated. And that is the integrated vision which we need to project when we study an urban landscape area. Maybe I think we have well past the time. It's 1:40 now. And
Thank you very much.
if I took too much time. But I haven't heard a single question from any student. Anupama, are you still there?
I am a
Yes, sir, I'm
student.
there.
Yeah, can you prompt some students to ask me some questions.
I was a student only, sir.
No, everybody, I was a student, I still am a student. But that doesn't mean I'm the current students who are actually going to carry out the urban landscape study. Do they have anything to ask?
Any questions, guys?
Gayatri,
Yes.
why don't you spell out your question, Gayatri? Yeah.
Yes, yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
Sir, my question is regarding that sacred part, sir. If we are doing any intervention or making in the sacred site, is it protecting the site or altering the character that exists? Then how can we manage these changes? What are the challenges faced in handling these sites, sir?
Well, the question is, first of all, you have to take an attitude or an approach towards the site itself before you decide to change or not change it. Yeah. Unfortunately, in the present regime in Australia, that approach is not there. They don't understand that just a grassy swamp area can be sacred. They don't understand that. Yeah. They can make it sacred if they built one cathedral there or something there. The whole worldview is so different from that of the Aboriginals. And the Aboriginals' worship place was actually just a swampy land. There was only grass, rocks, and water there. They are not organized. It was not an organized landscape or a built sacred location. They're nature worshipping people. So, if you don't have an attitude towards nature worship, you had an attitude towards nature worship, one should have preserved that swamp and then allowed them to continue their worship. They are still worshipping there, but they are like aliens who come there. Now it's prime real estate. This is the unfortunate story of the expansion of cities in India. Where we have been riding roughshod over things, either driven by real estate or by the ignorance of ourselves, our own ignorance in our intervention, in our planning. We don't understand that if you do an urban landscape study, you try and unearth these hidden, what I had called the seen and the unseen. There are unseen things which the Aboriginal, for instance, worship. What is the unseen thing is only the infrastructure underground is unseen. It is also important for us. But the other side of the unseen is not valued by us. That's the unfortunate part. So when you approach the project itself, all the questions of ethics and moral questions actually should loom large. I don't know if that's an answer to you, Gayatri. Is it an answer? Or is
Yes,
that,
sir.
does it sound evasive to you? No. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, my second question
Yes, Shubha.
is
Do you have any
Manasa.
question?
Uh,
Okay,
I'll go next.
okay. Yeah. Yes, Gayatri. Please ask.
Sir, my second question is that, like, I really like the way you explained those Rajiv Gandhi Ninevagam, sir. But like, I have a doubt, like, why you want to interpret or represent those 7 principles in the column manner? Like, why you want the column of silence instead of elements? Why you want, and the height of the how you design it, sir? Like, which inspires you to take that thing?
So actually that has a multiple level, it has meaning in multiple levels. One thing is that transparency that I saw in the ripples caused by the frog getting into the water. That transparency is what I was seeking. Yeah? So that already meant to me that there will be no roof on there should be no roof in the project, in the central memorial, that it should not be a building or an enclosed space, that it should be open to the elements. You know? So then it's a question of defining that. And the project brief had actually outlined these 7 principles around which he conducted his life. And scientific temper, sacrifice, and like seven of those things. And then they had to be somehow represented in the project. So I used that as a method of creating a wall, which is at the same existing as well as it's not existing as a wall. Even though they are individual columns, only 1.2 meter dia in stone, and they are placed in a certain distance. I can't remember the distance now. And they were 5 meters high because I wanted to achieve that sense of scale, which is so important for the Tamil people. 15 meters high stone walls, stone columns. And just by the configuration of them in an oval form, I was able to define a central area which is much more charged, but at the same time open and transparent. So it was a way of using that as a device to achieve what I want to achieve, which is to create the outdoor room. Yeah.
Yes, sir.
So
Thank
it
you,
is
sir.
an enclosed space as well as it is not an enclosed space. It has an ambiguous existence. And in ambiguity, there is always opportunity for new exploration. Things which are defined and definitive, there is no ambiguity in them, there is no area of exploration. So it's important to have that ambiguous transparency in it. So that's how the columns are used. Thank you. And we took a lot of time to draw those columns. They were drawn in full scale in my studio on the floor.
Thank you.
Yes, Shubha, you can ask next question.
Okay, ma'am. Good afternoon, sir. First of all, I must say it was more like a trip down to these places rather than a presentation. So I have a confusion. You talked about those buildings like the cultural center, which had tree where tribal people used to like tie their cloth of peace, and Kastuba Gandhi ka like hut and all. Uh, you also talked about the Sabarmati riverfront, right? And in that project, we got to know that land was reclaimed along both the edges of the water, and the people who were living along that edge were moved to some different place. And in that place, long-rise buildings and towers are being proposed to get constructed there. On the other hand, I actually got carried away by the fact that among all those like fancy and ultra developed spaces, you chose Tulsi Ghat to be your favorite, and not considering the fact that you are a theist. Sorry, yeah, Tulsi Bagh. So not considering the fact that you yourself are like a theist, and in fact, I guess publicness and social inclusion are the factors, right, that made you love that place.
Not only just public access and social inclusion, there are aspects of that space, but there is a peace and tranquility, and the time is standing still in that place.
Okay.
Have you ever been to, where are you from, Shubha?
Sir, I'm from Lucknow.
Lucknow, okay. Sometime try and make a visit to Pune.
Yes, I would love to, sir.
Go to Tulsi Bagh.
Tulsi Bagh.
What that space means.
Okay. Okay, sir. And yeah. Okay, sir. I would love to. And then, so you then talked about Basho's, Sir Basho's haikus, and we all know that like those 575 syllables actually represent the cultural beauty of Japan. So, isn't it contrary that on one hand we are aspiring and loving places like Tulsi Bagh and talking about haikus, and on the other hand we are like ending up making riverfronts like Sabarmati? I'm not criticizing that project, but I must say that due to those glassy facades in those buildings, people from not so classy backgrounds or say humble backgrounds would definitely get intimidated, right?
Absolutely. I fully endorse your view that I am not a fan of the Sabarmati Ashram project. I was telling you, in Sabarmati Ashram they would have erected, 7 meters high walls and filled that land and sold them to high-rise buildings.
Yeah. So in fact, it's just not
in the case of the project in Perth.
Yes, sir.
Luckily, they have not done that. They have allowed the landform to flow. And they've used the landform quite intelligently in terms of the location of buildings. So there are design values there, but that doesn't absolve either the architect or the authorities or us or anyone. That doesn't absolve our moral responsibility of destroying some land which was so valuable to the tribals.
Yes, sir. Actually,
so there is a point of conflict there. That's the reason why I use that as an example to show that these decisions are not easy.
Specifically for us, I mean, it's just not me, my friends, like from my batchmates. We often find ourselves like actually stuck between such contrary principles and all.
I'm happy to hear that. It's so important to have these conflicts. Because that is where you find the area of expansion, growing into those places.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Any other question, or sir, would you like to close this session now?
You have to close, Anupama. You are the boss.
Okay. Any other question, guys, you wanted to ask?
Anupama, Anand Wadvekar here.
Yes, sir. Yes.
Good afternoon, Katie. Hi. Good to see you. Good to see you, sir. After so long, and always pleasure to hear you. Just wanted to update students that, of course, you have been a phenomenal philosopher, guide, and friend during our student days and continues to be. It was wonderful to see how project evolved over the period of time, especially the Rajiv Gandhi Vanekam project, which you talked about. Because as a student, we saw it was in the formative stages wherein something had come up and it had just started. But now I could see the landscape and trees and the way it evolved. So it was fantastic to see all that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anand.
Thanks a lot, sir, for the wonderful presentation. We have learned a lot from you, sir, and it was so amazing presentation. You have give us a direction to view the or read the landscape in other way. So it's wonderful, and thank you all the participants to attend the this session. Hope you enjoyed this the landscape and city design session. And yes, thanks a lot. So,
Thank
sir,
you.
yes, sir. So, really, thanks a lot, sir. So, giving your wonderful and important time to us.
Thank you, Anupama. I enjoyed making the presentations. I, of
Yes,
course, struggled for weeks to come to terms with all the issues and the images and so on, because they are all from my own images. They're not taken from any internet or anything.
yes, sir.
They're photographs which I have taken myself. So these are places and things which I have experienced.
Yes,
And
sir.
out of that experience, that I've culled out the theoretical base also. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. Thank you.
Yes. Thanks a lot, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, sir. Yes, sir. Bye,
Bye.
sir. Bye,
Bye.
sir. Bye, sir.